I was always the spare chair at my family's table, the daughter who filled space but never truly belonged. At dinner last Sunday, my sister-in-law leaned across the table and announced she'd be moving into my duplex for free. My parents nodded, my brother smirked, and laughter rolled like it was already decided. They thought my mortgage, my years of sacrifice, were just background noise to their plan. I smiled, passed the bread basket, and slid an envelope across the table. They expected generosity. What they found inside would burn through every illusion they had about who really owned the keys. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of voices filled my parents' dining room. Candlelight flickered across polished plates, casting long shadows that seemed to mock me from the walls. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and buttered rolls, but even the food couldn't soften the sharp edges of the night. Sloane, my sister-in-law, leaned back in her chair with a smirk that curved like a knife. "When we move into your duplex, Ava," she said casually, as if it were already written in stone, "I'll need the master bedroom redone. Bright paint, maybe new floors. If we're going to live there long term, it's only fair." Her words dropped into the room like a hammer, heavy and certain. My brother Caleb chuckled beside her, proud, while my parents exchanged knowing looks. Then, as if choreographed, the whole table laughed. Laughed. At me, at my silence, at the assumption that I would bend without question. Heat rose up my neck. I forced my hand steady as I cut into the chicken, but the knife grated against the plate, loud enough to draw glances. I wanted to scream, to remind them that duplex wasn't theirs to redesign like a dollhouse, but the weight of years of dismissal pressed down on my tongue. Growing up, I had been the extra seat at this very table. When unexpected guests arrived, I was the one shuffled to a stool in the corner. My plate was always the smallest, my glass half filled. I learned early that my role was to make room, not to take it. Even when college dreams flickered in me, they were snuffed out. My tuition fund vanished overnight, redirected to cover Caleb's medical bills and later his business degree. My parents had called it family sacrifice. To me, it was proof I was expendable. Now, decades later, the same script replayed. I was 41, unmarried, childless, and apparently still the convenient placeholder. Caleb had a wife, kids, and a future everyone rallied behind. I was simply expected to provide the backdrop, the spare property, the spare life. "Don't look so tense," my father Richard said, leaning back with a smug smile. "Your brother needs stability. You don't. You'll figure things out. You always do." My mother Eileen chimed in, her voice falsely sweet. "Be grateful, Ava. You should be happy you can help family. It's not like you're doing much with that place anyway." I swallowed hard, letting their words scrape down like broken glass. On the outside, I managed a small smile, nodding as if I agreed. Inside, the storm built. They had no idea what that duplex cost me. Silent nights working overtime, meals skipped to save every dollar, weekends spent painting walls alone. Each corner held a memory of sacrifice they never saw. Sloane reached for her glass, her diamond ring catching the candlelight. "You'll thank us later. This will finally give you purpose, helping us build a real home." Purpose. As if my life had none until it served theirs. I folded my napkin slowly, steadying my breath. Their laughter swelled around me, filling the room like smoke, choking, suffocating. They thought I was powerless, the dutiful daughter who never said no. They thought I'd roll over as always, smiling through my own erasure. But beneath the table, my hand brushed against the envelope resting in my bag. Its crisp edges reminded me of the hours I had spent preparing, the signatures, the stamps, the careful planning they never suspected. That envelope wasn't just paper. It was armour, years in the making. I looked around the table once more, at my father's pride, my mother's condescension, Caleb's arrogance, Sloane's smirk. My chest tightened, not just from anger, but from the old ache of being unseen. They believed they were celebrating their victory. What they didn't realize was that the script had already been rewritten. I lifted my water glass, forcing a smile. "To family," I said softly. The toast drew more laughter, more nods of approval. None of them noticed my hand slip beneath the tablecloth, pulling the envelope free. I placed it carefully beside my plate, the paper pale against the dark wood. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten seat. I felt like the one about to turn the table. The envelope sat beside my plate like a secret I wasn't ready to share, but its weight anchored me. As their laughter rippled around the table, my mind wandered back to the nights that had carved me into who I was, the long, silent nights that built the very home they now claimed. I remembered the first evening I clocked in at the diner after my office shift. My feet ached from standing all day, but I tied on the apron and forced myself to smile at strangers. Every tip, no matter how small, slid into a jar I kept hidden in my closet. At the end of the month, I'd empty it, roll the coins, and deposit them into a savings account no one knew about. The bank teller used to look at me with pity, as if I was chasing something I'd never catch. There were mornings when I left one job at sunrise and headed straight into another, my hair damp from a rushed shower at a gas station sink. I learned to live on black coffee and peanut butter sandwiches, cutting corners wherever I could. Friends invited me out, but I always said no. Every dollar I didn't spend was another brick in the wall of a dream only I believed in. When the realtor handed me the keys to the duplex, my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped them. I remember standing in the empty living room, the air smelling of fresh paint and dust, whispering to myself, "This is mine." Finally, something of my own. I spent weekends sanding floors, patching drywall and painting until my arms ached. No one helped. No one even asked how I managed. My parents called it a hobby, a phase that would pass when I grew tired. Caleb said I was wasting my life on starter property. Yet every nail, every brushstroke, every late payment I scraped together was proof that I could build something without them. The duplex wasn't just a house, it was the first time I chose myself. Back at the table, Caleb's laughter grated against that memory like sandpaper. "We'll knock out that ugly wall in the master bedroom," he said to Sloane, already sketching their life inside my walls. "Turn it into a walk-in closet. You'll love it." My mother nodded approvingly. Yes, Sloane deserves a comfortable space. She's given us grandchildren after all. The words sliced deep, the old wound reopening. Ava, the daughter who never gave them anything worth bragging about. No husband, no children, no legacy they recognized, just a duplex they thought was community property. I steadied my hands on the table. The fork trembled, but my face stayed calm. They saw a woman cornered, someone too meek to speak. What they didn't see was the preparation I had made months ago. The duplex wasn't even under my personal name anymore. It had been transferred quietly, legally, into Northside Haven LLC, a company I built with the same grit that had carried me through those endless night shifts. The paperwork had been filed, the trust established, the property secured. It wasn't a rash decision, it was strategy. Because deep down, I always knew a day like this would come. I knew the family who once borrowed my college fund without asking would never hesitate to claim the roof over my head. I looked at my father, who was busy pouring himself more wine, confident in his authority. I looked at my mother, who smiled at Sloane like she was the daughter she had always wanted. I looked at Caleb, puffed up with entitlement, and Sloane, basking in the glow of assumed victory. They didn't know the rules had already changed. With a quiet breath, I slid the envelope fully into view, placing it carefully between my plate and the bread basket. The table chatter slowed, eyes flickering toward it. I kept my voice light, casual, almost dismissive. "Since everyone seems so invested in my duplex, I said softly. I thought I'd bring something to share. Caleb reached for it instantly, certain it was some kind of lease or renovation budget he could negotiate. But I kept my hand over the flap, holding it there for just a moment longer, savouring the shift in the air. For once, I wasn't the forgotten seat at the table. I was the one setting the terms. The room fell into a hush when I withdrew my hand from the envelope and slid it toward the centre of the table. Caleb snatched it with the eagerness of a child grabbing the last slice of cake. His smirk widened as he tore it open, expecting a gift of surrender. The smirk faded. His eyes darted across the first page, and a crease formed in his brow. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Sloane leaned in, snatching the papers from his hands. Her lips moved quickly as she scanned the lines. The colour drained from her face. "Northside Haven LLC?" she whispered. "What is that supposed to mean?" My father set down his glass, irritation sharpening his tone. "Enough theatrics, Ava. What are you pulling?" I folded my hands neatly in my lap, keeping my voice calm. "It means the duplex is no longer in my personal name. It belongs to my company, and my company doesn't do free housing." The silence broke like glass. Caleb laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. "You formed some fake company just to keep us out? That's pathetic. You've always been jealous, Ava, always looking for a way to feel important." Sloane jabbed a manicured finger toward me. "You can't seriously expect family to fill out applications. That's insulting. We're not strangers." My mother's lips pinched tight. "Family comes first, Ava, always. We raised you better than this." "Raised me?" The words burned my throat, but I forced them down. "You raised Caleb to expect everything. You raised me to expect nothing." Richard leaned forward, his jaw set. "You're being selfish. Your brother has children, responsibilities. You don't. What good is a duplex sitting empty when it could give them stability?" The familiar refrain, the script I had heard all my life. I was the spare, the one meant to sacrifice so that others could shine, the one expected to step aside with a smile. I inhaled slowly, steadying my hands against the tremor that wanted to betray me. "I'm not saying no one can live there," I said softly. "I'm saying anyone who does has to follow the same rules as everyone else." Caleb scoffed. "Rules? For us?" I nodded once. "Yes. Inside that envelope isn't just the deed under Northside Haven, it's also the residency policy." Sloane blinked, confused. She flipped to the second page, her eyes narrowing as she read aloud. "All tenants must apply, undergo a credit check, sign a lease, and pay security deposit prior to occupancy." The room erupted. "This is insane!" Caleb shouted, slapping the paper down. "You're treating us like tenants off the street." "That's exactly what you'll be," I replied, my voice calm, though my chest thundered. "Tenants, and tenants follow rules." My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the paper, skimming it with disbelief. "You can't mean this, Ava. Family doesn't need contracts." "Family," I said quietly, "shouldn't need to take without asking either." Her eyes snapped to mine, wounded and angry. Richard muttered something about betrayal under his breath. The weight of their stares pressed heavy against me, but for once I didn't fold. Inside, the old ache roared. Every dismissal, every time I had been told to step aside, every sacrifice no one acknowledged, it all coiled tight in my chest. They still saw me as the expendable one, the buffer, the daughter who would never stand her ground. But the papers on the table told a different story. They weren't just protection. They were proof I had built my own authority. Caleb shoved back his chair, his face red. "You can't seriously expect us to go through this circus. We're family. We'll move in and you'll get over it." I met his glare head on. "No, you won't. Not without going through Northside Haven. And Northside Haven doesn't bend to entitlement." The room went silent again, but this time the silence was mine. For once, I wasn't just defending myself. I was setting the rules, and by the look on their faces, they were only just beginning to realize that the walls they thought they owned were now made of paper, And those papers were mine. Their voices kept bouncing off the walls of the dining room, sharp and relentless, until they blurred into a dull roar in my ears. Family doesn't need contracts. Family comes first. Selfish, betrayal, the same words I had heard my whole life, recycled, sharpened, aimed to cut me back into place. I stared at the papers lying on the table, crisp and official, yet fragile against the storm of their disapproval. And for a moment doubt crept in. What if they were right? What if by drawing these boundaries, I was the traitor they claimed? The memory rose unbidden, dragging me backward in time. Years ago, when I was still patching drywall in the duplex, my cousin had begged me for a place to stay, just for a month. She came with 2 suitcases and promises of rent once she got back on her feet. 1 month stretched into 6. Her friends started showing up with keys she hadn't asked permission to copy. When I confronted her, she laughed and said, "Come on, Ava, it's just family." I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls I had painted with my own blistered hands, while strangers stomped through the kitchen and left dishes in the sink. I felt like a guest in my own home. By the time she finally moved out, the carpet was stained, the fridge broken, and my trust shredded. That was the day I promised myself never again. Never again would my sacrifices be taken for granted. Never again would I be cornered by guilt into giving away what I had bled to build. Transferring the duplex into Northside Haven LLC wasn't cruelty, it was survival. But sitting at the table now with my parents glaring, it was hard to remember that. "You've put money over blood," my father snapped, his knuckles white as he gripped his glass. "We didn't raise you to be this cold." I wanted to shout back that he hadn't really raised me at all, that his energy had always gone into Caleb, the chosen son, the golden child. But the words stuck in my throat, heavy with years of silence. My mother shook her head, disappointment etched across her face. "We taught you that family is everything, Ava. That's what kept us strong all these years." Strong? The word lodged like a thorn. I thought of the birthdays Caleb got cars, parties, tuition, while I got "you'll manage." I thought of the nights I was told to babysit instead of study, to work instead of rest, to give instead of ask. If that was strength, it had only ever flowed one way, toward them. Still, their judgment pressed down, threatening to crush the thin scaffolding of confidence I'd built. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was cruel. Maybe I really was the spare, trying too hard to claim a place that was never mine. I lowered my eyes, my pulse thudding in my ears. The air in the room thickened, every second of silence dragging me further into the pit they had dug for me long ago. And then it happened. My mother, in her attempt to defend Caleb, let the word slip. "You've always been taken care of, Ava. Even when we had to pull your college fund to save the company, you never complained." The room froze. The words hung between us, raw and irreversible. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened, realizing too late what had been revealed. My chest hollowed. So it was true. The savings account I'd once dreamed would carry me to a university campus hadn't vanished by accident. It had been siphoned, sacrificed, not for me, not with my consent, but for the company, for Caleb, for their vision of what mattered. I had suspected, but to hear it confirmed so casually was like a blade twisting deep. My hands curled into fists under the table. They hadn't just overlooked me, they had harvested me. My future, my education, my chance to belong somewhere beyond this table, it had all been stripped away to fortify someone else's life. And not once, in all these years, had they admitted it. Until now. The room seemed to tilt, the floor slipping beneath me. I was dizzy with betrayal, with the sudden clarity that every sacrifice they praised as family first had been mine alone to bear. They called me selfish, but I had been the one gutted to feed them. I lifted my gaze slowly, locking eyes with my mother. Her lips were pressed tight, as if she wished she could pull the words back. But it was too late. The truth was out. A strange calm washed over me, colder than the wine in my glass. If I had ever doubted why I needed Northside Haven, that doubt was gone. Because in this family, walls weren't built to shelter me. They were built to shut me out. The next morning, I drove to the duplex, hoping the quiet of my own walls might steady me after the chaos of last night. But as I pulled into the driveway, the sharp whine of power tools cut through the morning air. My stomach sank. 2 men in work boots and dust-covered jeans were measuring the windows, scribbling notes on clipboards. A pickup truck idled at the curb, its bed stacked with lumber. I stepped out of my car, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. "Excuse me," I called, forcing my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" One of the men barely glanced at me. "Contract work, remodeling job. Caleb said we should start today." The name hit me like a slap. Caleb. "This is private property," I said sharply. "You have no authorization to be here." The man shrugged. "Talk to your brother. He said it was family-owned, said you'd be fine with it." I felt heat rush to my cheeks, a mixture of anger and humiliation. Caleb hadn't even asked. He had simply assumed again that my silence meant permission. The men packed up slowly, unconcerned, and I stood there gripping my keys so tightly the metal cut into my palm. The duplex, the one place I had fought for, bled for, was being treated like a sandbox for someone else's dreams. "Ava." I turned at the sound of a familiar voice. Mrs. Whitaker, my elderly neighbour, was standing at her porch in a faded robe, her grey hair tied back with a scarf. She'd lived on the block for decades, long enough to watch me mow the lawn by hand when I couldn't afford landscaping, long enough to know the hours I spent hammering and painting alone. Her eyes narrowed at the truck. "Don't tell me they've already started moving in." I shook my head, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Just contractors. Caleb's idea." She tisked, folding her arms. "That boy's been spoiled since birth, always taking, never asking. Your parents let him, but you—" She softened, stepping closer. "You built this. Don't let anyone write their name across your work." Her words hit me in the chest. "It's not easy," I admitted, my voice low. "When it's family, every no feels like betrayal." Mrs. Whitaker tilted her head, her eyes sharp despite her years. "There's a difference between betrayal and boundaries. Betrayal is when they take what was never theirs. Boundaries are how you stop them. Don't let them deposit their dreams in your bank, child. You'll wake up empty." I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. Her words carved into me deeper than she knew. As the contractors finally pulled away, I stepped inside the duplex. The air smelled of paint and dust, still familiar, still mine. I ran my hand along the wall, the one I had sanded smooth, painted ivory with trembling arms. This was supposed to be my safe place, the proof of everything I'd endured, and now it felt vulnerable, invaded. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an email or a message from work. Instead, the caller ID was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was low, distorted. Male. "That house isn't yours to keep, Ava. It belongs to the family. Always has, always will." My breath caught. "Who is this?" The line crackled. "You can hide behind papers and companies, but blood decides, you'll see." Then the call ended. I stood frozen in the empty living room, the silence pressing in until I could hear my own heartbeat thundering. My hand shook as I lowered the phone. For the first time since transferring the property, fear crept under my skin. Papers and LLCs felt strong on the table in front of my family, but against voices in the dark. Against people who believed entitlement outweighed law. Suddenly my defences seemed paper-thin. I pressed my back to the wall, the one I had painted with hope, and slid down to the floor. My knees pulled tight to my chest. I tried to breathe, tried to remind myself why I had built all these safeguards. But the words from the phone call echoed mercilessly. That house isn't yours to keep. And in that moment, despite everything, I felt like the forgotten daughter again, alone, vulnerable, and afraid that no matter how many boundaries I drew, my family would always find a way to erase them. By the time I got back to my apartment, my hands were still trembling from the call. But fear quickly hardened into resolve. If Caleb thought he could bulldoze his way into my home, then he needed to learn that rules weren't optional. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the document Nadia had drafted months ago. Notice of unauthorized entry. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a moment, then I typed Caleb's name into the recipient line. I attached the formal letter, crisp with legal language, and included a second file, a rental application packet. If he truly wanted to live there, he could apply like anyone else. Before hitting send, I added a note. This is not personal, this is business. Please follow the process if you are interested in tenancy. I pressed the key and watched the email vanish into cyberspace. A small part of me shook at the thought of his reaction, but a stronger part felt steady. For the first time, I wasn't reacting, I was acting. The response didn't take long. My phone buzzed half an hour later with a text from Sloan. Really, Ava, applications, credit checks, security deposits. You're embarrassing yourself. Who wants a 40-year-old spinster dictating terms like she's some landlord queen? You don't even have a family. What do you know about running a household? Her words sliced, precise and cruel. I felt my chest cave slightly, the old ache resurfacing. The label of less than, the reminder that without children or a husband, I was invisible to them. But I forced myself to breathe, to let the sting pass. I whispered out loud, as if to convince myself, I know exactly what it takes to run a household. I built one from nothing. Still, the text lingered like poison. The next morning, I drove by the duplex to reassure myself it was still mine, still intact. But what I saw in the yard sent my pulse racing. A banner stretched across the porch, bold letters declaring, "Welcome home, Caleb and family." My mouth went dry. On the lawn sat 2 folding tables stacked with plastic cups and paper plates. A grill stood ready, a cooler of drinks beside it. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, tied to the railing. It was a celebration, a move-in party, planned without me, as if I no longer existed in the equation. I stepped closer, my shoes sinking into the grass. The banner flapped in the wind, mocking me with every ripple. This wasn't just presumption, this was erasure. They were writing me out of my own story. My phone buzzed again, a new text from Caleb this time. "We're having people over this weekend, don't make a scene, it'll be easier if you just go along with it. Everyone knows the house is better off in our hands anyway." I stared at the message, my vision blurring with fury. The arrogance, the entitlement, it was more than a power grab. It was a declaration that my blood, sweat, and sacrifice meant nothing. I looked at the duplex, its windows reflecting the morning light, the same windows I had scrubbed until my fingers cracked. I thought of the nights spent painting trim, the meals skipped, the overtime hours worked just to make the mortgage, and now they were throwing balloons in my face as if I had never existed. Mrs. Whittaker stepped out of her house across the street, her eyes narrowing at the spectacle. She shook her head slowly, mouthing words I could read even from a distance. "Don't let them take this from you." I clenched my fists. She was right. But as I stood there, the weight of their mockery pressing down, doubt seeped in again. I had papers, contracts, rules, but they had audacity, and sometimes audacity was louder than law. Still, beneath the swirl of humiliation and fear, a spark burned. This wasn't over. Caleb thought he was planning a celebration, a triumph. He had no idea that every balloon he tied, every guest he invited, only fueled my determination, because I wasn't going to let them throw a party in my house. Not unless they wanted the celebration to end in a way none of them could predict. That night, after pacing my apartment until the carpet fibres had worn under my feet, I pulled the cedar box from the top shelf of my closet. It was small, barely larger than a shoebox, its wood darkened by time. I had inherited it after my grandmother passed, but I had never dared to open it. Grief had kept it sealed, like some fragile piece of her I wasn't ready to disturb. Now, with Caleb's banner still burning in my memory, I carried the box to my kitchen table. My fingers shook as I worked the clasp, its brass cold and stiff from years of neglect. The lid creaked open, and the faint scent of lavender drifted out, her scent preserved in the grain of the wood. Inside lay a stack of folded papers, yellowed with age, and beneath them a single iron key tied with a fraying ribbon. My breath caught as I lifted it. The key was heavy, cool, its teeth jagged in a way that felt both ancient and deliberate. With trembling hands, I unfolded the top sheet of paper. The handwriting was hers, looping and precise, a style I'd watched her use to write grocery lists and holiday cards. "My dearest Ava," it began. "If you are reading this, it means life has already tried to take pieces of you, and I am sorry. I wish I could shield you, but I know how our family can be. I know what it is to be the one left out, the one whose needs are always second to someone else's. I carried that weight once too. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. This key belonged to the first home I ever bought. I never kept the house. It slipped away when I was young, too eager to please, too afraid to fight for myself, but I saved the key as a reminder. A house is not just wood and brick. It is only worth what you claim for yourself. Others will try to live inside your labour, but the walls mean nothing unless you choose them. A home has value only when it belongs to you first." My throat tightened. I pressed the page to my chest, the paper soft against my skin, as if her voice was wrapping me in a comfort I had never found at my parents' table. She had known. She had lived it, being overlooked, being sacrificed, being told family always came before her. And she had left me this, not just a relic, but a warning. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks as I held the key, the ribbon dampening in my palm. For years, I had believed my pain was a lonely kind, unique to me. But in this moment, I realized it was part of a lineage, a pattern carved into the women of my family. My grandmother had been cast aside, my mother had learned to cast me aside, and I had been left to carry both the wound and the choice. The words echoed in my mind. A home has value only when it belongs to you first. I looked around my apartment, the walls bare, the space temporary. Then I thought of the duplex, its ivory-painted trim, the hardwood floors I had sanded, the nights I had slept on an air mattress while patching leaks. It wasn't just shelter, it was proof that I had chosen myself once, even when no one else did. The ache in my chest deepened, but alongside it flickered something fragile, hope. My grandmother's letter didn't erase the betrayal, but it reminded me that survival could become strength, that being cast aside could plant the seed of independence. I clutched the key tighter, as if it could anchor me. For the first time since Caleb's move-in party plans, I felt steadier. Not strong exactly, but tethered, to her, to myself, to the truth that I wasn't broken for needing boundaries. The tears kept coming, but they felt different now, less like collapse, more like release. At the bottom of the letter, her final words were written in bold, as if she had pressed harder on the pen. "Do not let them take what you bled to build. Choose it, guard it, and know that you are not alone." I whispered the words into the quiet room, my voice raw. Choose it, guard it, not alone. For the first time in days, I let my body sink into the chair. I pressed the key to my lips and closed my eyes. The pain was still there, sharp and deep, but threaded through it was something new, something that felt like the beginning of a path I hadn't seen before. The iron key sat on my nightstand like a talisman. I woke the next morning with its weight still in my hand, the ribbon tangled between my fingers. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind, "Choose it, guard it." And for the first time, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. By noon, I was back at the duplex, walking through the rooms I had poured my life into. Sunlight streamed across the hardwood floors, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. I paused in the front room, the largest space, and suddenly saw it not as a living room, not as a bedroom for someone else's children, but as something more. I imagined shelves lining the walls, filled with books. I pictured tables and chairs where women could gather, sip tea, and talk without judgment. I saw a space where women who had been told they were spares could breathe, rest, and remember their worth. The idea struck like lightning. This house wasn't just mine, it could be a refuge. I pulled out my phone and dialed Nadia. "I want to designate part of the duplex as a community reading room," I said, words tumbling over themselves. "A place for women who've been through what I've been through, single mothers, women rebuilding after divorce, anyone who needs safety and space." There was a pause on the line, then Nadia's steady voice. "Ava, that's brilliant. We can draft paperwork to establish it as part of Northside Haven's mission. That way, it's protected from personal claims." I exhaled, my heart racing. Protected. That was all I had ever wanted, to protect what I had bled for. But now, protection wasn't just for me. It was for others like me, women still clawing for air. The following week, I began clearing out the room. I painted the walls a warm cream, laid down rugs that softened every step, and brought in the shelves I'd been storing in the garage. As the transformation unfolded, I felt lighter, as if my grandmother's key had unlocked something in me I didn't know existed. When I told Caleb and Sloane, their reaction was volcanic. "You're kidding," Caleb scoffed, throwing his hands in the air. "You're turning perfectly good living space into some kind of charity project? That house is for family." I held his gaze. "It is for family, for women who've been treated like they don't belong in theirs." Sloane's laugh was sharp, bitter. "So this is your grand rebellion? A book club for broken women? You're pathetic, Ava, always trying to prove you matter. Newsflash, you don't." Her cruelty stung, but instead of shrinking, I felt my spine straighten. "You don't get to decide what matters here, not anymore." Caleb slammed a fist on the table. "This is a betrayal. That house was supposed to secure our future. You're stealing it from your own blood." My voice was calm but firm. "No, I'm reclaiming it from the people who always assumed it was theirs." For the first time, I saw their rage for what it was, not righteous anger, but fear. Fear that the script was slipping, that I was no longer playing the part of the spare. Word spread quickly. Within days, women from the neighbourhood dropped by, curious about the project I was calling the Wren Room. Some donated books, others offered to paint or bring furniture. The space filled with life and laughter, with voices that carried stories not so different from mine. Standing in that room, surrounded by women arranging shelves and stacking novels, I felt something bloom in my chest. This wasn't just a house anymore, it was purpose. And as Caleb's furious texts poured in, accusing me of betrayal, demanding I hand it back, I realized the duplex had finally become what it was always meant to be. Not a prize for someone else's entitlement, not a reminder of my loneliness, but a sanctuary, a place where the forgotten could finally belong. The Wren Room had only just opened its doors when my phone buzzed with a call from Nadia. Her voice was calm but edged with urgency. "Ava, I need you to come by the office. It's about your father's company." My stomach tightened. I hadn't been directly involved in Mercer Manufacturing for years, not since they had siphoned my college fund to keep it afloat. Still, the name carried a weight that pressed against my ribs. What happened? The bank has forced their hand. The company's debt has reached a point where restructuring is no longer optional. They've called in creditors. And Ava, this affects you. I frowned. Me? How? She hesitated, as if bracing for impact. Because of the portfolio investments you've been building. Remember those corporate bonds you purchased under Northside Haven? A portion of them were tied to Mercer Manufacturing's outstanding loans. By acquiring those debts, you've become one of their largest creditors. I gripped the phone tighter. You're saying I own part of their debt? Not just part, Nadia said. Enough to give you a seat at the table. Technically, you're now one of the company's largest stakeholders. The room tilted around me. I sat down hard in the chair by the window, my pulse hammering. All those nights poring over contracts, buying bonds from struggling local businesses. It had never occurred to me that one of those anonymous investments would circle back to my father's empire. It was surreal. I had spent my entire life excluded from Mercer Manufacturing, watching Caleb groomed to inherit it, watching my father beam with pride at every one of his mediocre achievements. And now, without trying, without even knowing, I had become a key voice in its survival. That can't be right, I whispered. Nadia's tone softened. It is, and the bank has called a meeting for Friday. They'll want your input on the restructuring plan. Ava, whether you wanted it or not, you've inherited leverage. When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the glass. Me, the forgotten daughter, the placeholder, suddenly holding a power my father had never intended me to have. The irony stung. I hadn't bought those bonds for control. I had done it to protect jobs, to give struggling companies breathing room. And now, that same intention meant I had accidentally walked into my father's boardroom with more influence than Caleb ever dreamed of. The next day, I met Nadia at her office to review the documents. Stacks of financial reports spread across her desk, red ink everywhere, losses piling like wounds that wouldn't close. They've been bleeding money for years, Nadia explained. Your father took risky loans to keep up appearances, but it's unsustainable. If the bank pulls the plug completely, hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. I flipped through the pages, seeing numbers that made my head spin. But then I saw the names, line after line of employees, people I had grown up around, the families who had attended our church, whose kids I had babysat. Faces filled my memory. Mr. Gonzalez, who always brought me candy when I was little. Mrs. Hayes, who once sewed my prom dress when Mom said we couldn't afford one. These weren't just numbers. There'll be collateral damage, I murmured. Unless you intervene, Nadia said. I looked at her sharply. Me? They'll never listen. My father won't even acknowledge me at the dinner table. You don't need his permission anymore. You're a creditor. You have a legal voice, Ava. I stared at the contract in front of me, my name, Northside Haven LLC, printed beside Mercer Manufacturing like some cosmic joke. For years I had been shut out of this world. Now the door had swung open, whether I wanted it or not. I thought of the Wren Room, of the women who found shelter in the space I had created. Maybe this was the same, another chance to use what I'd built, not just for myself, but to protect others. Still, the weight of it pressed down hard. To walk into that boardroom meant stepping directly into the fire of my father's contempt, Caleb's resentment, my mother's disapproval. It meant showing them once again that I was not the weak daughter they remembered. Nadia leaned forward. This is a twist, Ava. Life has given you leverage where you least expected it. The question is, will you use it? I closed the folder slowly, the key from my grandmother still in my pocket like a reminder. My heart pounded, not just with fear, but with the strange thrill of possibility. For the first time, I would walk into Mercer Manufacturing not as the daughter left behind, but as a stakeholder whose voice could not be ignored. The boardroom smelled faintly of old leather and stale coffee, the kind of room where decisions had been made for decades without a single woman's voice carrying weight. I sat at the long mahogany table, my folder of notes neatly stacked, my grandmother's key tucked inside my pocket like armour. Across from me, my father sat tall in his navy suit, his face carved from stone. Caleb lounged at his side, whispering comments I could hear only in the sneer curling his lips. Other board members shifted nervously, papers rustling as they waited for the meeting to begin. The banker cleared his throat. As you know, Mercer Manufacturing has reached an unsustainable level of debt. Restructuring is required. Major creditors must present their proposals. Miss Mercer, Northside Haven LLC, you have the floor. Every head turned toward me. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes drilling into me with disdain. This is absurd, he muttered. She has no place here. But the banker continued, She has a legal stake, Mr. Mercer. She will be heard. I rose slowly, feeling my legs tremble beneath my skirt. My voice, though, came steadier than I expected. I've reviewed the financials. The company cannot survive if we keep the current structure. The debt service alone is drowning operations. But liquidation would devastate hundreds of employees, people who've given their lives to this company. My proposal is simple. Protect the workers, restructure the leadership. Murmurs rippled through the room. I set my papers on the table. The bank keeps the current repayment schedule, but expenses are cut from the top. That means executive salaries are reduced, and it means my father steps down as CEO. The words landed like an explosion. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is treachery, his voice thundered, reverberating off the wood-panelled walls. You dare come into my company, built by my sweat, and call for my removal? You ungrateful child. My chest tightened. Every instinct told me to shrink, to apologize, to retreat, but I forced my shoulders square. It's not personal, it's reality. The numbers don't lie. Under your leadership, Mercer Manufacturing has drowned in debt. If you stay, the company dies. If you step aside, it survives. Caleb jumped in, his voice laced with venom. You've always wanted to tear this family apart, Ava. First the duplex, now this. Do you get some sick thrill out of betraying your own blood? The words pierced deeper than I wanted to admit. Betrayal. Traitor. The same accusations I had feared since childhood. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the table. I hated that a part of me still longed for their approval, even as I stood against them. For a moment, silence swallowed me whole. Doubt gnawed. Was I crossing a line too far? Could I live with being the one who toppled my father from his throne? Then I thought of the employees whose names I had read in the reports, the families who depended on their paychecks, the children who deserved stability. I thought of my grandmother's letter, of boundaries not as betrayal but as protection, and I knew. I straightened, letting the fear burn into fuel. This isn't betrayal, I said firmly. This is responsibility. You may call it treason, but I call it survival, for the company, for its people. The banker cleared his throat again. The proposal stands. Shall we vote? Hands went up, one after another, some hesitant, others resolute. When the count was done, the decision was clear. Richard Mercer, CEO for 35 years, was to step down. My father's face turned crimson, his chest heaving. He looked at me as if I had gutted him with my bare hands. You'll regret this, he spat. You'll regret destroying your own family. My throat ached, but I didn't look away. I didn't destroy it. I saved what I could. As the gavel struck to finalize the vote, a strange hush fell over me. The ache of his words lingered, but beneath it surged something stronger. Power, purpose, vindication. The forgotten daughter had just saved the company her family built, and for the first time in my life, the boardroom echoed with a truth no one could erase. My voice mattered. The boardroom victory lingered in my mind like a bruise. Outwardly, I had won, secured the company's survival, proven my voice mattered. But inside, I felt hollow, as though I'd traded a piece of myself for a seat at the table. A few nights later, my mother called. Her voice was soft, too soft, carrying the weight of something unspoken. "Ava," she said, "can you come over? Just us. No Caleb, no your father. I think it's time we talked." I almost said no. I was tired of conversations that ended in blame or dismissal, but something in her tone pulled me in. Maybe, after everything, I still longed for a crack in the wall between us. When I arrived, the house was quiet, dimly lit by the lamp in the living room. Mum sat in her favourite chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders slumped, her eyes rimmed red as if she hadn't slept. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You were right to protect yourself. I see that now." Her voice trembled. "But there are things you don't know. Things I should have told you years ago." I sat across from her, my heart pounding. "What things?" She took a long breath, as if steadying herself. "When you were in high school, Caleb got sick, really sick. We didn't tell you the full extent because we didn't want to scare you. The treatments were expensive, Ava, more than we could handle. Your father and I, we had to make choices." Her words hung heavy in the air. I gripped the arms of the chair. "The choices?" Her eyes filled with tears. "We used your college fund, every dollar. We told ourselves you'd be okay. You were strong, resourceful. Caleb needed saving. You could take care of yourself." The world tilted. My chest tightened as if the air had been sucked out of the room. So it was true. The suspicion that had haunted me for years was real. My future had been traded away without my consent. My dreams sacrificed on the altar of Caleb's survival. I wanted to rage, to shout that I wasn't as strong as they thought, that every scraped knee and silent night had been proof of my fragility, not resilience. But the words tangled in my throat, strangled by grief. My mother reached across the coffee table, her hand trembling. "We thought we were doing the right thing. Caleb was dying, Ava. He was our son. How could we not?" Her voice cracked, and I saw the truth in her eyes, love for her son, desperation, and the guilt of a mother forced to choose. But all I felt was the fracture of years spent believing I didn't matter. "You didn't even ask me," I whispered. My voice shook, thin and sharp. "You didn't even give me the chance to say no. You just decided my future was expendable." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "We thought we were protecting you. You were so capable. We knew you'd find a way." Capable. The word stabbed deeper than any insult. My capability had been their excuse to abandon me, to load me with silent burdens I had never agreed to carry. I pressed my hands to my face, but the sobs broke free anyway. Years of being overlooked, of being the spare chair, the forgotten daughter, all funneled into this moment. There had been a reason, but knowing it didn't erase the wound. My mother wept quietly across from me, whispering apologies that could never refill what had been emptied. In that dim room, grief swallowed me whole. The logic of her confession didn't matter. Whether Caleb's survival had depended on it or not, the truth was the same. I had been sacrificed, and no explanation could make the blade cut less deep. I sat in silence for a long time after my mother's confession, the weight of her words pressing into me like stones. She kept murmuring apologies, but they rolled over me, shallow against the years I had lived in the shadow of her choices. Finally, I lifted my head, my voice raw. "Do you have any idea what those years were like for me?" She blinked at me, her tears still falling. "Ava." "No." I cut her off, my tone sharper than I intended. You need to hear this." I told her about the double shifts at the diner, the nights I came home smelling of grease and exhaustion. I described the times I skipped meals so I could pay the mortgage, the envelopes I kept hidden in my closet with coins counted down to the last cent. I told her how close I came to losing the duplex, once, twice, praying every night that a single missed payment wouldn't send me back to nothing. Her face crumpled with each word, but I didn't stop. "You thought I was strong enough to survive without help. But I wasn't strong. I was desperate. I was exhausted. And I was alone." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by her sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, voice hoarse. "I thought we were saving Caleb, but I see now. We were losing you." For a flicker of a moment, compassion stirred in me. She wasn't a villain, not entirely. She was a mother who had made an impossible choice and never faced the fallout. But before I could speak, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Well, isn't this dramatic?" Sloane. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes glinting with disdain. She must have slipped in when I wasn't paying attention. "Honestly, Ava," she sneered, "you act like you're some tragic martyr. So you worked a few jobs? Skipped a few dinners. Big deal. That's life. You should have just accepted your role years ago. Sacrifice is what family is for. Maybe it's time you stopped whining and started giving again. Caleb carried the weight of illness. You can carry the leftovers. That's your duty." Her words sliced through me like ice. For a moment I almost faltered. Almost. But then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for weeks. Its crisp cover bore the seal of Northside Haven. I placed it on the coffee table between us. "This," I said evenly, "is the family terms document. If you want to be part of my life, these are the boundaries. Visits, dinners, birthdays. I'll show up, I'll be present. But money, property, my work, off limits. No more taking without asking. No more assuming I'll give until I'm empty." Sloane laughed, a harsh bark. "You can't be serious. Contracts with family." "Yes," I said firmly, "especially with family. Because history proves I can't trust you without one." My mother reached for the document with trembling hands, scanning the first page. Her eyes filled again, but this time with something other than guilt, recognition. She nodded slowly. "It's fair." Sloane scoffed. "Fair? It's pathetic. You think this makes you powerful, it makes you cold, heartless." I leaned forward, my gaze locked on hers. "No, Sloane, it makes me free. I can forgive, but only within these lines. Forgiveness isn't the same as surrender. I won't be the family's spare resource anymore." For the first time, Sloane faltered, her smirk wavering. My mother clutched the document to her chest, as though afraid it might vanish. In that moment, I felt the shift inside me. The pain of betrayal hadn't disappeared, it never would, but I had carved a space where I could breathe, where forgiveness was a choice, not an obligation. Twist 10 wasn't a dramatic reveal on paper. It was quieter, sharper, the realization that I could choose boundaries over bitterness, that I could allow connection without allowing exploitation. I wasn't healed, not fully, but I was no longer broken either. And as I rose to leave, the family terms document still on the table, I carried with me a strength I had never known. The strength to forgive without surrendering, to love without erasing myself. The Wren room smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings. Cream-coloured walls glowed in the late afternoon light. Books lined the shelves in neat rows, and a rug in shades of blue and grey softened the hardwood floor. A round table stood in the centre, with chairs gathered around it, waiting for voices to fill the space. I had sent the invitations carefully, handwritten notes to my parents, Caleb, and even Sloane. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about showing them what I had built, what I had chosen for myself and for others. When they arrived, the silence that followed was almost reverent. My mother's eyes scanned the shelves, her fingers brushing over the spines of novels donated by neighbours. My father stood stiff near the doorway, his jaw tight, but his eyes taking in every detail. Caleb and Sloane lingered together, their expressions guarded, suspicious of the trap they thought might be waiting. "This is beautiful," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "It's more than beautiful," I said softly. "It's a place for women who've been overlooked, who've been told they were expendable. It's a room where they matter." For a long moment no one spoke. Even Caleb seemed at a loss for words, though his jaw clenched, the familiar anger simmering just beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, then laid out the second purpose of this gathering. "I know you still want housing, Caleb. You've made that clear. But the duplex isn't available. It never will be. What I can offer is different." He looked at me sharply. "What are you talking about?" From my bag, I pulled another folder, this one thinner, stamped with the Northside Haven logo. I placed it gently on the table. "I have other properties in my portfolio. One of them, a 2-bedroom apartment downtown, just opened up. I'm willing to offer it to you and Sloane at a reduced rate, 20% off for 6 months. Sloane's eyes narrowed. "What's the catch?" I met her gaze evenly. "The catch is simple. You both agree to work with a financial counselor during that time. Budgeting, debt management, savings. If you commit to that, you get the discount. If you refuse, then I can't help you." The silence after my words was electric. My father shifted, his brow furrowing. My mother looked between us with wide eyes. Caleb's face darkened. "You think you can bribe me into sitting through lectures about money? That's insulting." "It's not a bribe," I replied calmly. "It's a boundary. I'm willing to help, but only if you're willing to change the habits that brought you here in the first place." Sloane scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is humiliating. We're family, Ava. We don't need your charity dressed up as rules." I steadied my voice. "It's not charity. It's accountability, something I've lived with for years, something you've avoided." Caleb's fists clenched at his sides, his pride swelling like a balloon ready to burst. His eyes flicked to my father, searching for support, but Richard said nothing. My mother reached for Caleb's arm, her touch gentle but firm. "Maybe it's not such a bad idea," she whispered. He jerked away. "You're siding with her now?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm tired of watching this family fall apart because we can't face the truth. Ava's offering help, real help. We'd be fools to throw it away." The room tightened with tension, every breath drawn sharp. Would Caleb cling to his pride, or would he finally bend? I held his gaze, steady, unwavering. "This is my offer, Caleb. Take it or leave it. But know this, you don't get to claim my home, my work, or my life anymore. If you want a place, you earn it." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Caleb's jaw worked as he ground his teeth. Sloane's face twisted in fury. My parents waited, suspended between hope and dread. And I stood there, heart pounding, waiting to see whether my brother would finally step into responsibility or retreat further into pride. The silence inside the Wren room stretched so long that I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Caleb's face was flushed red, his pride warring with the reality in front of him. For once he wasn't shielded by my parents' excuses or Sloane's sharp tongue. He was just a man being asked to choose, pride or responsibility. Finally, with a slow exhale, he nodded. "Fine," he muttered, his voice thick. "We'll do it. We'll take the apartment. We'll go to the counselling." Sloane's head snapped toward him, disbelief etched in every line of her face. "What? You can't be serious." But Caleb didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on mine, and in them I saw something I had never seen before. Surrender, yes, but also a flicker of humility. It was faint, but it was real. Relief swept through me, but I didn't let it soften my stance. "Good," I said simply. "I'll have Nadia draw up the paperwork." Sloane sputtered, fury bubbling on her lips, but Caleb silenced her with a raised hand. For once, his decision didn't bend to her will. The shift was subtle, but it was there, and I felt the weight of it settle into the room. My father, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke. His voice was rough, choked with something I couldn't quite name. "You saved the company, Ava. I fought you, called you a traitor, but without you, we'd be finished. I see that now." I turned toward him, startled. His eyes glistened, though he quickly blinked the tears away. Richard Mercer, the man who had never once praised me, never once acknowledged my worth, was looking at me with something that resembled respect. The little girl inside me, the one who had begged for scraps of approval, ached to run to him, to finally bask in the validation I had craved all my life. But I held myself steady. I had learned too much to crumble now. "Thank you," I said softly. "But I didn't do it for you. I did it for the employees, for the families who depend on Mercer Manufacturing. They deserved saving, just like I did once." His lips pressed together, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. My mother stepped forward then, tears streaking her face. "I'm sorry, Ava, for everything, for the silence, for the choices we made that left you alone." This time I let myself move toward her. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as she sobbed against my shoulder. But even as I comforted her, I knew this hug was different from the ones I used to give. It wasn't the hug of a daughter begging for love. It was the embrace of a woman who had drawn her boundaries and could still offer grace within them. When we pulled apart, I reached into my bag and pulled out the small iron key tied with the frayed ribbon. My grandmother's key, the one that had anchored me when I thought I might drown. Everyone's eyes fixed on it as I held it up. "This," I said, my voice steady, "isn't just a key. It's a choice. My grandmother carried it when she lost her home, and she gave it to me so I wouldn't repeat her mistake. It taught me that value doesn't come from what we inherit. It comes from what we choose to build and how we protect it." I turned to my niece, Poppy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, her wide eyes taking everything in. She was too young to fully understand the wars her parents and I had fought, but she understood enough to know the weight in the room. I knelt in front of her, pressing the key into her small hands. "This is yours now, Poppy, not as a house key, but as a reminder. Your worth will never come from what others give you or take from you. It will come from the boundaries you set, the kindness you choose, and the strength you guard." Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded solemnly, clutching the key to her chest. The room was silent, but it wasn't the suffocating silence of dismissal or betrayal. It was full, alive, heavy, with the recognition that something had shifted forever. I stood tall, looking around the Wren room one last time. This place was more than walls, more than bricks. It was proof that I had been forgotten, yes, but I had refused to stay forgotten. The story of the spare seat at the table had ended, and in its place stood a woman who had chosen her own keys, her own chains, and her own freedom.